Good evening, everyone. My name is Gary Gaston, and I want to welcome you all to the Civic Design Center's very first Urban Design Forum of 2022. Happy New Year. We can still say that because it's the last day of January. Very excited to be launching this series and to have you all joining us here tonight. Okay. Super. Our mission at the Civic Design Center is to advocate for civic design visions and actionable change in communities to improve quality of life for all. And we're so excited to be able to bring some messages tonight from a wonderful group of panelists and that focus on and help support our mission across the city of Nashville. Our main focus areas of work as an organization are education, advocacy, health and the built environment through our Shaping Healthy Communities work, mobility and land use, and reclaiming public spaces. And you'll be hearing all about those different projects and programs throughout the course of this year as a part of our Urban Design Forum series. Sorry, having a little difficulty with our clicker, but we will continue. We want to thank you to all of our sponsors and supporters. Our presenting sponsors for this year are Amazon, Global Furniture Group, and Mars Pet Care. Thank you very much to those sponsors and to all of our sponsors that support us, as well as our individual members. And we want to thank you for being a member. If you're not currently a member, please consider signing up and supporting the work of the Civic Design Center. And if you want to know more about that, you can sign up as a membership on our website. So tonight, as a part of our kickoff series, we are joined by a wonderful panel of guests. We have Ed Henley, who is a principal with Pillars Development. We also have Lauren Fitzgerald, who is the executive director of Jump Nashville. And we have Ashley Bergeron, who is the principal and owner of Swipe Right Art. Thank you all for being here. It's really a pleasure to see you. And to kick us off, I did want to, for those of you who are in the audience here, we're doing a hybrid format tonight. If you're in the audience here personally, in person, please put your questions onto Twitter, and you can follow us and do that through the Civic Design Center and hashtag #RepCivicDesign. And if you're in the Zoom group, you can put that into the chat, and you'll also have an opportunity to post questions on Twitter and through Zoom as well. So if you're familiar with the work of the Civic Design Center, you know that throughout our history, we have had 10 principles that were generated through the process of the Plan of Nashville, which was one of our foundational organizational endeavors in the early 2000s. This past year, we celebrated our 20th year anniversary. And as a part of the lead up to that process, we conducted a community-based process to update our principles, to bring them into, I guess, the current era, to also add principles, to add a potential for 2 principles that were not addressed in the original 10 principles of the Design Center, because obviously things changed a lot over a 20-year time period. So we have launched those 12 new guiding principles. And if you're on the line, you can put your phone up to this QR code, and that will take you to a link to the 12 guiding principles. And so as a part of the unveiling of these principles, we thought it would be a great opportunity to take the first 4 months of 2022 and focus on each one of those principles in the coming months. And our first set of principles, these are also organized by 4 different categories. And the first one, change this, is the top is the category of foundation. And this is the idea that community engagement, community involvement should be at the foundation of everything we do as an organization and everything that really we do as a city. The voices of the people reflected in the work and the projects that are done across the city of Nashville. So everyone who's here today is speaking on a different principle that falls under the category of foundation. And with that, I am going to introduce the first principle, which is under the representation pillar. This is where my sight lines are not. Here we go. I've got one right here. Also, if you're coming to our events, you can have one of these and put it in your office. So our first principle is representation. Follow planning, design, and development processes that are grounded in community involvement. And for us to kick that off, we have Ed Henley. He'll be taking the mic.
Awesome. Thank you, Gary. Thanks everyone for having me. I'll take the clicker. So my name is Ed Henley. I'm the founding principal of Pillars Development. We're a land use development firm, a boutique firm here located in Nashville. We actually specialize in planning, design, and construction management, project management. And we have our 3 tenets that guide all of our work: curiosity, creativity, and community. So very excited to talk about that here today, but specifically from the viewpoint and vantage point of a developer. And so again, our work is grounded in community development. A lot of the projects that we manage have been on behalf of municipalities, the city, the state, and then also certain institutions that are located in the Middle Tennessee area. And so all of our work is involved in heavily engaging the community at the very beginning of the process and throughout the process. Not only because we want to keep lines of communication open, but we understand we're stewards of public dollars and we're also stewards of the public realm. But I think it's important to know that not all projects that we do are public, and not all projects will be public projects, especially like here in the city of Nashville, we're growing extremely rapidly. And one thing I think to highlight here, you'll see on the screen, is the Fort Nagley master plan. I actually have lived on both sides of the Fort Nagley process. One, when Fort Nagley site, particularly the Greer Stadium site, was an RFQ listed for public development. Was part of a team there that came with a lot of fire because of that area being where they have a lot of history, when they desired a lot of preservation. But also coming from now the public side of the parks, we're wanting to have a conversation with the community about how to honor the history of Fort Nagley, and to do that with a lot of deep and involved education and engagement. So one of the things I want to say is a lot of times developers, they come to the table and they don't want to have tomatoes thrown at them, right? They want to do things that impact and improve a community. A lot of times the challenge for them is really getting the right type of conversation started, having the right form. And so what you're seeing on the screen in front of you is an effort that a collection of consultants have done with the Parks Department to really have a variety of different ways to engage the community. And I think that's really important to understand. You have to meet people where they are, but you have to also understand that not everyone has the access or the resources or even the background and education to understand a lot of things that happen and go on in development. And so we spend a lot of our time kind of overthinking or jumping far beyond where people really need to have their first conversation. So on the screen, there's a couple of examples of just how you can have a lot of variety when you engage people. This was done on an evening in a local school. We made that open forum and just really wanted to have an education process at the beginning. So there was a forum and a panel very similar to what we're having tonight. And then it turned into a very interactive exercise where there were several stations. Really got people to engage, but also there was a forum that created a bit of identification and familiarity with the project. On the next set of slides, you'll see something that I like to say is a little bit more non-traditional, but really a great way to engage the community. And a lot of times, the best way to engage a community is to really go into the community, right? And take part in events that are already happening in those communities, right? So in this example here, myself, a few of our team members, we actually set up during the Open Streets event, which is put on by Walk Like Nashville. And we were in the Buchanan area, and there was a project that we're actually doing right off of Buchanan. And we said, look, this is a great opportunity for us to engage this community, not to try to hold a community meeting where we just people come out and brag on our project and say how great it is, but we support the community. We interact with other neighbors, vendors, and members in that community. And we show that we're part of that community even before we come and ask them for any type of vote, any type of preference or policy changes. And we just make it an education opportunity. We also did something that was pretty fun. We created Pillars Poem. So we blew up and made a full-size version of beer pong. We used paint buckets and wiffle balls. And that was a big, big success. Had a lot of young people that were engaged and wanted to get involved, and it gave a time consumption activity so parents could stand and talk with us, and engage with us about the project. So just being creative, and people will appreciate that authenticity and the effort that you put into engagement. And the last set of slides is really just a deeper dive. You have to understand that you're building a community where people are going to live, and understand that developers know this and they want to be very mindful. I think a really great example of that is Envision Edge. Our team was part of that process. Of course, built on a lot of work that was done by the Civic Design Center, great work, engaging that community and giving a great foundation for a master plan that came to NDHA to happen. But it was a complete overhaul effort to how you traditionally do community engagement. I think there was at least maybe 6 or 7 months of engagement that was done just by NDHA before they brought in a consultant team. And just understanding that when you have a process that really allocates that much time, you educate a community, you bring them into the process, and they have a chance to truly feel like they're shaping their future, you get an enormous amount of feedback, you get an enormous amount of buy-in. Now, that does build a big promise that you have to deliver to the community, but that's what we want it to be. You want the community to feel as though they've had a chance to write and prescribe that vision for their community, and then also have a part of development. Here, you have any questions about that? I think that's a good overview. And honestly, I just want people to take away that when you're having a conversation with the community, treat it as such, right? It's not a presentation to the community. You're not just coming to show them something and it's one-sided, but starting out with a listening session and then slowly working more and more into a shared vision.
Well, I think your perspective is really great because you have that experience of being on both the city side and the municipal side of a process and plan that took shape and transitioned to the development side. So that probably, what did you take? Was that very helpful for you in taking that to your development practice?
Yeah, absolutely. So absolutely, I think it's most helpful when I've done it from the city side, and again, I like the community in DHA where the only focus you have at a certain point is to engage the community, right? It's not to get across the finish line to have a certain type of project, to have a certain type of economic return, right? Those things need to happen. But that level of dedication to say, we're going to engage this community and make sure that they're engaged, involved, and feel heard before we even take the next step, I definitely absorb that.
Well, I know we will delve more into development and the impacts of that on communities in our discussion, but next we want to move on to our next principle, which is strengthen the unique identity of neighborhoods that reflect their people, history, and culture. And on the screen, you can see the corresponding goals that go with that principle, which are discussion about sense of identity, community resources, appropriate development, and how could the potential for this to deter the displacement that's happening. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to our esteemed panelist, Lauren Fitzgerald, the jump.
Thank you, Gary.
And Lauren, give an introduction to yourself.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Hello, everyone. My name is Lauren Fitzgerald. I am the interim executive director of the Jefferson Street United Merchants Partnership of Jump Nashville. We amplify and serve the Jefferson Street corridor in North Nashville in 3 spaces: economic empowerment, political prosperity, and cultural vitality. I also bring with you history and background in interculturality. I'm the managing director of the Intercultural Leadership Institute, and I'm also the founding director of Strategize 619, which develops cultural strategies towards freedom. So I also want to acknowledge that we are delivering these messages to you on Shawnee, Cherokee, and Yuchi hunting land, and that the first settlers known to this land were the Mississippian culture, and they raised corn, made great earthen mounds, painted beautiful pottery. The native people of this land were pushed west by the United States government's colonial power after almost a century and a half of fighting to maintain their sovereignty. The colonialism and capitalism is bedded into modern systems and is still prevalent today. So my land acknowledgement that I typically offer to ground myself in the work is the perfect segue to inform the to help me inform the National Civic Design Center's principle, strengthen the unique identities of neighborhoods that reflect their people, history, and culture. So why history? Why culture? History can help us shape the empathy of a community. Getting to know someone's cultural practices can help build a bridge for deepened understanding of the objectives of our own collective and diverse communities. History and culture can provide a foundation of how people interact with one another. Do you know the old phrase, if you know better, do better? It's really up to all of us to seek history so that we can learn from them. It is up to us to learn about the specific communities in which we belong, to identify points of diversity and to include, celebrate, and liberate these stories in a justified manner. It is up to us to understand the histories of harm to specific communities that we now deem cool to be a part of, and how these communities have had to resist to fight for what they feel is just. What were the strategies of resistance? Who were the major players and how might they be coalesced together? What did people do for fun? What are people doing now, right? So I've asked Veronica to drop a link in the chat. It's a pretty cool historical overview that I'm just gonna share it with my panelists. If I can get it to click, it was, if it's not up, I failed. Anyway, failure. But so I wanted to talk just a little bit about Jefferson Street because, right, I represent this organization that serves Jefferson Street, and not just Jefferson Street, the 37208 corridor. And so I wanted to talk a little bit about the history. And a lot of folks can think about Jefferson Street as a space where all of this music happened. And yes, music did happen on Jefferson Street, but this was a space where folks were doing a lot of commerce and merchant ship. And this is prior to the interstate being installed, basically creating an apartheid between TSU and Fitz. So once, long story short, once this neighborhood was impacted, and it was a neighborhood as well. It was a neighborhood that ran on a grid. And once this neighborhood was impacted by this construction, the area had a massive downward turn in economic engagement. And so a lot of the different businesses that were on Jefferson Street closed, and a lot of the families were displaced. They were displaced all around the city. They went to the outward edges of Davidson County. But what we're doing now is really connecting to the history. And so what does that mean? That means coming and building bridges with community members who are leading organizations so that we can build collective power. So there is a consortium called the North Nashville Community Economic Development Consortium. And this is a group of nonprofits that invest in North Nashville so that folks who feel like they have a historical tie, but might not be able to afford the $1,500 rent that is the minimum in that area now, can have an opportunity to stay in the community. So we are pulling from our historical knowledge so that we don't make the same mistakes that we've done in the past, and that we don't forget that harm has already been done to these communities. And so I welcome people to come and be in community with me and be in coalition with me and be accomplices as we move towards not repeating our historical woes. Oh, do you have any questions for me?
Well, there's a lot. So I think instead of going deeper into that right now, I'm just gonna say I'm so thrilled you're here and really look forward to working
Thank you.
in the coming years. Next slide, please. And so we will move on to the third principle This pillar, which is integrate diverse expressions of public art into buildings and community spaces. And the underlying goals of that are art that reflects the people, never perpetrates injustices, and can be functional forms of art that tie into the built environment. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Ashley Bergeron with Swipe Right Art.
Thank you. Hi everybody, I'm so excited to be here. I want to just briefly tell a little bit about my story. So in 2017, I became an accidental gallery owner. And that happened because a world famous artist, Ian Ross, came to paint a 150-foot mural in the Gulch. And he wanted to also sell artwork. I happened to have some empty walls, and so I got connected to him. And in April of 2017, I opened the gallery. And we are now a full service gallery and art furniture showroom, which is super cool. And then we've had a thriving few years, and then we recently were displaced due to the Christmas explosion. So in one day, very tragic, I lost my home and my gallery. And luckily we've rebuilding and moved most of my belongings back home today, which is pretty exciting. But instead of moving away from my vision and fleeing, which was an option, I mean, I really could have left, I decided to really grow and learn from this experience. And so I leveraged that tragedy by doubling my artist roster. We now work with way more talented artists than I had planned. We had a temporary, very successful art gallery last year at Broadway. And so that was really exciting. It allowed me to have a real bricks and mortar retail location. And we really did an artist takeover for about 12 months on that property. So in a moment, I'll show you some pictures of that experience. But that's just a teeny bit of my background on how we started. But not only as an art gallery do we sell local art, but we do murals throughout the entire community. In fact, we do in other states as well. But right now, we're really focusing on Nashville, our urban core, and our diverse neighborhoods that surround downtown Nashville. So that's been really exciting to work with our local talent as well as international talent to really grow our art, our outdoor art experiences in the city. So let me just show you. This is a really lovely example of a brand new mural that went up last year. And it was intended to really draw attention to a new restaurant. So it came to us from the building owner and the restaurateur that really wanted to bring attention to this beautiful piece of architecture, the Flatiron Building, that's over at Division and Broadway. And it was a fun example of a business, a local business wanting to give back to the community. And the entire building is wrapped with this gorgeous mural, and each piece on the top, which I don't put an image of it in this slide, but from up the hill you can see it has directional signage from like the river and all these different parts and pieces of the city, which I thought was a really fun example. And the point of bringing this one up is a lot of businesses come to us because they want Instagrammable moments, they want to bring attention to their building. And it used to be that we would do, something small. Now we're doing full building murals, which is really cool and exciting. And it's a great way for the business community to support our local artist community, really help them thrive. Before I move to the next one, I wanted to just briefly mention sort of the on-trend, what's happening in a lot of cities and globally, is we're really seeing a lot of interactive art. Obviously we all know the Wings mural in the Gulch where people stand in line for 42 minutes and longer just to have their picture in front of it. But we also have these really fun pop-ups like the one in Germantown, where you can have your Christmas card photos with a polar bear or sitting in a Christmas sleigh or Santa sleigh. And then there's a really fun interactive element in the Gulch where one of our artists painted the stairs. You can walk down the stairwell of art stairs. But then another artist in town created like a 3-dimensional changes where you could sit and have your lunch in the environment, or you can have your picture made, etc. But it's really a great opportunity for people to live in an outdoor space with art surrounding them. Of note, we do have one of the oldest murals in the city. I think it's 22 years. Is at Church Street Park. I don't know if you knew that was one of the very first murals we had downtown. So it's still hanging on there. We'll see when that eventually changes. Let's see, there's like 2 more. This was a really wonderful project. We really love to have an impact on communities. And this particular project I asked a company to sponsor some paint so that we could paint the boarded up windows from the Christmas explosion. We had, I don't know how many hundreds of windows that were blown out and still boarded up right now. I think we're maybe, would you say maybe 40% repaired and 60% still boarded up. So we raised money and worked with the Civic Design Center, and we had 100 volunteers and about a dozen artists. We had the Dutch Consulate General come and paint with us, as well as with the mayor and the police officers that helped rescue all of my neighbors from the explosion. They got to paint with us as well. So it was a 2-day event, really wonderful experience. And we just had people from age 8 to 80 painting with us for our community. Another part of this project is we painted a bunch of extra 4x8 pieces of wood and have recently installed in Germantown around one of the, off Jefferson Street, off of one of the historic buildings that was destroyed in the tornado. So that was a really lovely experience for all of us to bring joy and positivity and reflect on the fact that, you know, we went through something really difficult in our community, but we can grow stronger from it, and we can still be surrounded by beauty even amongst some of the saddest times that we've had in our city. And then the last thing I wanted to chat about was, let's see, the private and public partnership component. So I had the privilege of being the art curator, and still am, at Fifth Broadway. And that whole entire project really was a game changer for downtown Nashville, because not only did we get new beautiful buildings, but it really became a really brilliant way of integrating private and public. So the sidewalks on the outside of the perimeter are public, and on the inside, they're private, but they kind of act as if they're all one city block, which is really cool. And so we were able to do, I think we had 2 75-foot murals. We just installed a 3rd one in December. And then we had rolling murals that went all over the neighborhood from, you can see some of the samples in the slide. It was really quite an awesome experience. And we asked each artist to paint their interpretation of what they felt Fifth Broadway was going to give to our community, and what they felt like as artists that they wanted to show that voice was. And the diversity of paintings was just so beautiful. And we're working on a partnership to have them hanging in several locations in the future. So that's really, really cool. And the reason why I wanted to bring that up is they're a private company that has put millions and millions into this project, but they're still giving back, which I love. And we do live poetry and sidewalk chalk and all kinds of fun things. So come visit and notice the art when you're there. And then I think the very last thing I wanted to just mention was maybe just a sneak peek of what's ahead. So we're working with TVA, which is really exciting, to help them promote their electric vehicles. They're going to be installing stations so that anywhere within our region, you'll be able to charge your EV within about 50 miles everywhere. And so we're going to be painting murals to really celebrate that exciting, momentous event for our region. Another one we're doing, we're partnering with Amsterdam, and we're going to be doing the beginning phases of Under the Siegenthaler Bridge. It's going to be part 1. And it will be a famous Rembrandt painting that will honor our local Nashville greats who are really giving back to our community. And then there's a new speakeasy popping up on Broadway, and I can't really tell you anything else except for you'll start to see daisies popping up throughout the city, painted ones as well as 3-dimensional ones. And then I really want to mention North, which is a mural team in North Nashville. I would love to mention Creative Girls Rock, which is a nonprofit that really helps young women grow and evolve. They've been doing some really beautiful murals, and it's just two of many groups, but they're all really wanting to give back and honor the greats of our community. One that I definitely recommend going to see is on Commerce Street, formerly Fifth Avenue, and it's Representative John Lewis Way, and it's a beautiful big mural that really celebrates him, the work he did, the Freedom Riders, as well as several other people within that mural. So definitely go visit that. And I know I probably left out some stuff, so maybe it's cute.
If it comes to you, yeah.
Okay. Because, I mean, I just feel like there's so many things to chat about. I mean, we have hundreds of murals we can talk about.
Thank you, Ashley. So let's start with some discussion. I want to kind of go back to the I guess the first principle, which is the idea that community engagement, connecting to community voice should potentially, or not potentially, should be the foundation that we all start with. And I guess the question is, and you know, we've talked about art, and I think how art is in a lot of ways permeating through ways to engage the community. But how do we start? What is the process of acknowledging the past where we do not connect to community members and have designs and projects imposed upon them, and where we are now in Nashville with a pretty rapidly changing city, where we try to engage, or you know, maybe we don't always do that. But I guess the fundamentals, I'd like a little discussion on where we are now with that process, and what are ways that not just the Civic Design Center, but development practices, nonprofits like Mission Jump, particularly focused in an area where that was most impacted by these decisions in the past. What's the process? Where are we now in 2022 with that, do you think? And Lauren, I'll start with you. Yeah, you might want to. That's a very deep question, but I think we have to talk about that, right? Yeah, absolutely.
Well, I'll approach it from a couple of perspectives, but you know, and I wear a lot of different hats, and I'm now a planning commissioner, so it's 30,000 feet up, and then
You're covering
walking step by step, like neighbors in the neighborhoods. But a phrase that I love, and I actually had a lot of discussion about this particular thing, because I've done different panels and different services around the country, and it's, you know, we have to understand that these communities have been heavily impacted by these communities. I think we're talking about the ones like Nashville, like the Edge community, the ones that were impacted by urban renewal, and are still impacted today by different forms of gentrification, ways that infrastructure projects kind of draw lines and kind of guide development. And we need to acknowledge that development is guided, right? A lot of times developers are seen as the bad people who come and build stuff and leave, but we have to understand that, you know, our local communities and our leadership are guiding that development, right? They're looking at policy, they're looking at plans that have been created, and they're responding to economic strategies that are being employed, right? Our leadership. But I think one thing that we have to understand, gearing up to have this conversation a lot more, is the public realm, and really understanding that there's a lot of communities where there are people of color, all different nationalities and different heritages, but a lot of them don't own the dirt, right? They don't own the dirt. They've lived there maybe even generations, but they don't own the dirt. And so they face a large amount of displacement as cities rapidly urbanize and grow. And so when you have communities of people, and they don't necessarily own the dirt, they don't feel they have control of their futures, the one thing that developers, organizations, leadership alike can do is respect the public realm, and honestly try to increase the public realm. I think one of the things that we encourage our developers to do now is to bring that public realm in through their developments, right? Connect them with the community, don't wall them off. And I say that that's really important because, you know, when you don't necessarily control the dirt of your home that you call home from home, but you still, that's still your neighborhood, that's still your community. It's really important to know that the way that that neighborhood, that group of people, they see their way to influence things is by controlling that public realm, is by having that influence. And so like the things we're talking about now are right? It gives that voice. It's the way to honor the people of our past that have made so much significant impacts to those communities. It's the way that when people may honestly be displaced from their home, that neighborhood and those streets and those markers that have identified those communities for so long remain. Or at least there's some way there that some honor and some homage is paid to them staying. And so, but that's the way you create a sense of empathy, and the way you create a sense of we're listening to you, and we want you to create the future from that. It's not a, well, yes, but now is a new day, and you go away. And I think a lot of people feel that push, right? That proverbial push out. It's shown when you start to see more and more building in your neighborhood, you hear more and more noise, the traffic changes. You have the things that we all like to see, you know, the sidewalks, and you have the bike lanes, and you have more vitality on the corners and on those corridors, but it doesn't always feel like it's from and for those people.
Or it's not priced.
It's not priced in their price range. And I think one thing that really, you allow people, you just have a listening session, you need to listen first. And I'll say this and I'll pass the mic. I know there's some really insightful things to be said, but one thing that came from the Envision Edgehill project that stuck with me for, and will stick with me for a really long time. And we went and we engaged the youth, right? So we had Salama Urban Ministries, which was a great partner. And we engaged the youth, and so age groups, maybe 6 to maybe 16. And there was a young lady that was there, and I don't know how old she was, but we were playing with Legos and different things, and it was, tell us when your community speaks to you, what do you want to see here? And we had these images of, right, you know, you do the vision boards, and you had these beautiful modern buildings, and somebody who loves architecture, an architect, but you love it, like, oh, that's so modern, and it's clean, it's beautiful. And the glass, and we were talking about, you know, you light the street, and you have all, you know, more eyes and all the beautiful windows, and it gives you a sense of safety and so on. So we're almost programmed to write the answer. Like, this is what you want to see. And the young lady said, well, I don't really like that. And she said it was because those kind of buildings aren't built for people who look like me. And it took me back because it was like, wow, like this is a inanimate object and a structure, but there's a connotation and a message to it. And so I think when you continue to have these dialogues and these conversations with communities and the youth who inherit these spaces, I think we need to really understand how much the built environment speaks, right? What we're saying about what we're doing. And I think when we take that into account, to your question here, that's where we are, right? We need to not just say the right things, not even try to do the right things. We need to make sure that what we put in place, the facilities and the buildings, really emulate and speak to the communities, and so they feel that it's for them. And there's no way to do that without letting them put their hands and their remains and their thoughts all over it. And I think that's something that really has to become more and more part of every kind of project, especially the ones that are significant. But even those small incremental ones, you know, that builds up momentum and it creates a certain feel for neighborhoods.
So one thing that I hear listening to you, Edward, is that need to connect to communities. And it makes me realize sometimes there's a disconnect between developers creating systems and structures of vulnerability, and how that space of vulnerability can inform what you should be accountable to, and what does it mean to engage pillars that are already in the community doing the work so that you can expand your net. And that's where I found that a lot of developers that I've been in conversation with in the few months that I've been in the room at Jump, that's what I'm finding that they're not being able to do is cast their net wide enough to really pinpoint, okay, if this is a community pillar, who else are they connected to? A pillar is only a pillar if it's holding up a body. So what does it mean to like connect to the greater body and then have that body like connect to others? So if you're not connecting to coalitions, you're still working within a silo, and you want to make sure that you're busting up out of those silos and really get to the crux of the issue. So if for instance, I hear you talking about the aesthetics of poverty. because someone, you know, is identifying with that. Well, what does it mean to connect with an organization that deals specifically with poverty, and what are their networks and how are they connected? So I just wanted to add that to the conversation.
Well, as a follow-up to that, I mean, you mentioned listening sessions, and I know, I think we had a conversation a few months ago about listening to the community as a part of your process. Maybe just expand on that. Like, what are you hearing? This kind of goes into your pillar too, but I'm just curious because it was brought up. What are you hearing?
For me in particular, I am hearing that, you wanna know, I'm hearing that they're not being listened to. And so for this whole year that I'm supposed to be interim, we're going into a chrysalis year, we're listening to the community, we're strategically planning based off of these conversations. So it's really about finding the partners so that the net could be cast. In my opinion, even as an organization rooted in the urban core, rooted on Jefferson Street, we still have a lot of ears, and we still have to listen to a lot of people right now. We still have a lot of connecting and reconnecting that we have to do. So I think it's necessary to always build in a listening practice. And when I say build in a listening practice, I mean put some money to it. I mean put some budget dollars to making sure that we're connecting, engaging, and having these whole conversations.
Right.
So
Because trust is doesn't happen. You can say that you're doing community engagement and take that in, but if people don't see the actions from that, like what you said, the building doesn't reflect, or the plan doesn't reflect what you heard, then you can't build trust.
Right, like they put they did the right thing with the cap, the interstate cap. They're holding off on it based off of the word that I got from the community engagement person. They were like, you know, the community, they're still unclear, so we're gonna hold off on it. I think that's the right move for the city, you know, and figure out a way to reach a consensus. And I think that's the right direction, even if it takes time, and time is also money.
Yeah.
So
I have one quick thing. I think, and you said kind of where we are, and I've said this before. I don't necessarily think this is an unpopular opinion, but I feel like as a whole, and this is not just a critique of our city, but this is our city, so this is what I'm talking about. I think that we don't have a really good communication strategy. And what I've found in being in the communication space now is that we have several problems that other cities are dealing with and other places around the world are dealing with. But somebody asked me once, well, how do we tackle affordable housing, right? You know, I wear that hat, made an affordable housing task force. And then it was, well, how do we tackle transit? I said, you know, the problems are going to be the problems, they're there. But we don't have a good system of absorbing and listening, having a solution developed, and then spitting it out on the back end for more feedback. We don't have that system built. We have to build a better system as a city. And a lot of times the community feels like they're given a plan that's already, if not half, mostly baked. You know, they kind of railroad it. And as a developer, a lot of times you say, you know, you don't get the types of input that give you the ability to compromise. You kind of just get the wall there, right? Like so many people are so no driven because no is clear. People say no because it's clear versus saying, okay, well, let's have that conversation, talk a little about it. And I also think too, a lot of the conversations, listening sessions, I should probably be a little more specific. We need to have listening sessions where there's the population, the general population of people, whoever the leadership or the developer is, and then you need the interpreters. You need those people that can speak the language of both sides. Because a lot of times I find myself in that space where no one's wrong. They just don't understand, right? And it comes from just not having a background, not being in space, not having spent the time. And there's different things that come about it. It does take resources to be able to land and get to those places. But ultimately, I think it's an overarching challenge with our city. And then I think organizations like yours that actually are put in that space and you create that forum, people have to see those as opportunities and jump in. And I think that's something that I'm encouraging a lot more people to do. Hey, if you're a developer, these are opportunities. You might not have a project in the books. You should be coming to these meetings. You should be doing these things. And if you can, you should find your partners that are active liaisons that have that history that can speak to the help translate. So I think that's something that we can actually do.
And Lauren, you mentioned coalitions because the issues that we're facing as a city with our growth and historically, just not only Nashville, all across the country, but no one entity can do it all.
Right.
The city can't do it, John can't do it, Civic Design Center, but we shouldn't. We should all be working together. That's the concept of coalitions. And I think, art to me, I think art is one of those things that can unify. I mean, it's a potentially a more of a faster, quicker process, but it can really help bring together. And so, I guess a question for Lauren, because your background, you have a history in art as well. How do you see some of these projects that are happening here? North was mentioned, the mural projects that are across the city. What is going on with those as the process of healing, or the messaging that's being shared in these murals? And what's the impact on the city? And I'll give that to Lauren and to Ashley.
Take first. I have to use the pen. I think that the art that is going up in Nashville is brilliant. I feel like the artist community here is one of the strongest artist communities that I've been a part of. And that's for me living in Memphis, Knoxville, Philadelphia, New York, and then back in Nashville. It does, because folks don't mind sharing here, and it's a really beautiful thing. One thing that I'm noticing is that as these artists who might not be, making the area median income are putting up these beautiful works, they're being pushed out of their neighborhoods too. So it's a phenomenon that we are calling artification. And so as we are celebrating these artworks, we still need to be mindful of the economic impact that it's having on the art community here in Nashville as well, because it's becoming a marginalized field here, if not already. So that's how it's a mixed emotion feel for me, but it's really about strategizing around how to, create economic empowerment systems for artists and the people and the neighbors that are there. So what does it mean to create those systems where they can come in and say, oh, well, I want to do an artist residency and the money's there to support them. And oh, I need housing. What does it mean to connect with an organization that might have a vacancy and put this artist in the housing space, and then, create kind of incubator space. Listen to me, I'm dreaming on the panel. Create incubator spaces for artists and just neighbors who really need, a bootstrap. A lot of these people, they say pull yourself up by your bootstraps. Well, you got a bootstrap to pull yourself up, but you got time to rub together with another penny. You don't have nothing. So we got to figure out a way to create bootstraps for our community.
Well, I will agree with you 100% on that. I would say Nashville is a great example, but it happens all over the world where artists come into a community, they make it beautiful. They're going into the places that most people wouldn't want to go in because they're a little more grungy and they need a little bit more, love and care, but they just want space. I mean, it's really, truly, they just want space, and they don't need a ton, but they need it. Mm-hmm. And the affordability component of artist space is like next to nothing. I mean, we have maybe 2 to 3 spots.
24/7 space.
Exactly, 24/7 space, and space where you actually can have a little bit of privacy in your space, and you're not hearing everybody all around you communicating. But so that's pretty normal. Unfortunately, it's a trend for an artist to go into neighborhood and make it awesome. I mean, look at Wynwood Walls in Miami is amazing, and the design district that's attached to it is over the top amazing. But there's no artist studios anymore. There are a few galleries, but not that many. And it's turning and changing, and we're not really that far away from that. Speaking of Miami, one of the things they do really well is their parking garages are gorgeous. They've got art garages everywhere. I mean, art on the parking garage. So not some of those little tweaks we could be doing as a community, like, hey, yeah, we understand you're about to create a 10-story parking garage, but let's actually look at that space as a piece of art, a canvas for all. You know, I mean, we all know the AT&T building is getting a facelift from the tragedy. The whole thing could be a beautiful mural that you can see from every single part of our city. It would be a perfect canvas. There are plenty of other locations that I could speak of that could be beautiful canvases.
Is that happening?
I hope so, I wish. And keep asking, and who knows, maybe one day.
One at a time, right.
Right. But to your point, yeah, they need the space, and it's not a ton of space. Smith G created a beautiful artist loft, what, a mile from here, not even a mile from here. It's very difficult to get in, it has a long wait list, and it's a great concept. My opinion around segregating by what you do is unfortunate, because then you don't have something to strive towards. You don't see somebody else that's doing a better job at it to help you get to that better place. And so I really don't believe that putting one income bracket in a building makes any sense. And I think that the future of development would be multi-layered, where a percentage, I'm not even gonna say the percentage, but it could be 5%, whatever that percentage is, that's dedicated to saying, hey, we understand you're not in the income bracket and can afford all the other levels, but we really want you as a part of our community because we know you have something to add to our community. And that's what I think is important. It's not all one price, not all one look, not all one income bracket. That if we can take the leadership in that as a community, we would really make a mark. We could really lead what other communities do. And that's something that's a simple change, you know, just a little bit. And in our city and our community can support that. Even if it's an artist in residency give back program, like, hey, you can be here at 30% less rent, but we would like you to create 3 or 4 pieces of art that we get to have in our building instead of somebody buying it. There's a way that we can actually really do a holistic community in all neighborhoods that invites everybody to come and contribute.
Curious, I think Ed, you mentioned it. I'm gonna give this is not exactly what he said, but I'll paraphrase. So the city, obviously the development community is large in any city. You know, you just call it that, development design community. But oftentimes the city leads the way, right? Whether it's policies or master plans or other types of things. And I'm curious, actually, from all of your perspectives, what is our city not doing that can lead the way back there? That's pretty strong, but we know that we have. I mean, you can't just ask developers to solve the problem of affordable housing or gentrification in communities, right? They're going to potentially go after like the dollars, but they might be part of the process. Is there something that in this coming year we really like to see on our wish list that could fall into all these categories we're talking about?
Well, for me personally, you know, I believe in you can make the things very black and white and then live in the gray, right? And so you have the carrot or you have the stick, right? And when you talk about affordability, which is becoming a pretty common theme in really every conversation related to our city and its growth. You know, let's just say we're handcuffed in a way. We can't really use the stick in terms of making housing affordable. And so to me, that just means you can be really creative with your characters, right? And so, you know, there are things that I would love to see, you know, added to our city's toolbox as it relates to rewarding communities and rewarding developments and rewarding developers and rewarding, you know, those people who bring those exact kinds of things and philosophies that we're talking about as programs forward. And our city has dollars allocated to using these things because they are solutions. And honestly, my belief and the thing I hope on my wish list is, you know, from 2022 through 2024 and 25, we have the city investing in some models that may seem off the wall and a little bit risky, But my personal belief, we have a couple of projects we're working on that are like this. You build the model, people see the model works, and people then replicate the model. They will do it without your incentives if they see that it works, because they're like, man, that's great, that's cool. We know that here. You de-risk it because you have proof of concept. And I think from that, you will be able to build so much faster in an ethical and an empathetic way that Nashville starts to just truly thrive, right? What we're talking about now, what we deal with right now is, yes, Nashville's growing, but it's not growing and thriving for everyone. And I think when you start to create these models where you see a project that checks all the boxes that we're talking about, and it still is economically successful, and it thrives because the communities that are in support them, and people come from all over to support that thing because it's the model that works, you will see that replicated. And it goes back to what I was saying, is where yes, policy and planning guided. It just so happens that right now, economic forces, you have to put dollars in it as well. You have to support some of those things that you naturally want to see, because if not, people are going to chase the bottom line because they have to, right? That's just the way our society is programmed. And so when you find unique and creative ways to overcome the bottom line by making things additive to a community, even if you think you're taking a risk and you produce them, we'll have, our next panel will be, well, let's look at this project and how to do this, right? Let's look at this project. And so that's what's on my wish list. And I think we're within, reaching distance of that, but there has to be some kind of strong jolt where it's not politically feared, and there's an economic commitment to supporting those kinds of things. Because you will see a lot of developers step up and say, yes, we'll do it. As long as I don't run into a roadblock later, let's do that thing. And so I'm excited to see more and more of those.
I'm with you. I would say, just to be direct, is to allocate dollars to the economic and community economic development space. There's not much. There's been some symbolic moves to say, hey, we've got an equitable director that knows about how to, how to change around the city, how to change around Atlanta, how to change around cities in Texas. But I don't see a lot of dollars being put into that space. And I think it's worth the investment to really bring community members, developers, and neighbors into the same space. And what we're talking about is being intentional about making that happen at the city level and the mayoral level. So we want to make sure that we're holding our city officials accountable to creating spaces for equitable economic development in a real budgetary way.
And it's a critical time issue too, right?
Yeah.
Because the rapid pace of development it's like every month you see a new project.
We don't get time back. The dirt that's being built on now, you don't undo what's being done.
So the basics of the dirt, it doesn't go away.
I think everybody can win. I really do. I think we can all win. And it's going to take people like us that keep coming to the table and keep saying it over and over again. And that's not good.
I will push back. I don't know if everybody's gonna win. I think that in terms of equity, people are gonna have to give up some of their power so that other people can have power. And that's okay.
Totally.
Yeah.
Yeah, and our focus has been on the concept of socially conscious design, which is trying to have a conversation with people that they're part of everything they do should be a part of that conversation, right? Thinking about not just the financial aspects, but what part of that project impacts other people, not just themselves. No,
I was just thinking about like that notion of everyone winning. We can all win, we can all be comfortable, but just like everybody should have a fair chance at you know, being able to start something from beginning to end, be able to live comfortably. I just feel that way.
Absolutely.
Well, I think one thing, you know, I'll put the developer hat back on. I think there's a significant challenge, and I say there's a challenge from creating the promise and delivering the promise. And I honestly think that you would find a lot, and I'm saying a lot, but you find a significant percentage of developers that would be willing to have these types of projects, programs, engagement involvement. If there was support that would come from those communities that were there, because they would feel that they would have that support all the way through. And then you have that chicken and egg where that community is not going to support it because they feel like it's fictitious, right? And you have to undo the sins of the past. But I really do think that everyone may not win equally, right? But people can definitely all come around the table, everybody leaves satisfied. And if we have a better delineation of what expectations are from everybody, again, it goes back to just being able to listen and have an interpreter. But if you know, every conversation that I'm having with the community now as far as affordability, it doesn't even have to be a residential project, it's affordability, because it's, well, how is your project going to affect the cost of the homes a block or 2 blocks or 3 blocks away? And then quality of life, right? We're dealing with challenges of traffic, and we're dealing with how we navigate and move through our city. Not everyone is wanting to do this level of expansion because they see it as a negative. And so when you come to the table as a developer, you have this preconceived notion it's going to be a negative conversation. And you come to it as a community member, you have a preconceived notion that they're going to say whatever they need to say just to get the votes and just to get passed, and checking the box. And you know, there has to be a genuine way to break those barriers down. I think the formula is you just have to start being more and more entrenched in our communities. Going back to the third again, you know, there's a lot of, as Nashville keeps going, there's just less and less things zoned for the type of development that we're having. And our zoning process and our engagement process is required to rezone these. We collectively need to welcome people who are coming to the city as developers and say, yeah, you need to just come on down. Like, right, like come down, watch what we're recording now, listen to what we're talking about, and leverage our resources, find those partners that you can engage early. So this dialogue is long being had before you put a shot clock on the community and say, you need them to say yes or no, because that creates a lot of anxiety.
Yeah, I wanted to add to that. Thank you. One of the things like architects, developers, artists, designers in our community, we have a shared voice, which is when other developers and builders come in from other cities, they're not necessarily aware of our connectivity in our communities and what our voices are. And so what would be really amazing is at the early stages, they come to our groups and they say, hey, what's going on? And that's, I mean, I happen to have a little bit that's happened to me, but they've asked me. And I said, the first thing you do is you include the artist community. First thing you do. And we did, and we've been doing that, but that's only a few people. We have hundreds and hundreds of other projects that they're not even asking, they're not looking, and they're not sourcing locally. And they're bringing in great design, and I love that they're here because they're adding to our community. Our international artists, I love that they're adding to our community. But we really need to remember our local voice and what we have here. And so if there was some way that they can, almost like a committee that we created that says, look, these are the people that we want you to meet early on, the moment you buy that land, the moment before you even break ground into the dirt, let's talk. And then they're not going to be backtracking and fighting a PR mess because they've already started working with us early on and including the local community. I think that's really important.
I hear a lot about that too, with all the developers. You know, it's like getting in front of them. How do you educate them on the history, the expectations of the Nashville and the city?
We've been organizing in North Nashville around that. So there's 5 organizations in this consortium. I have to use my hands to remember them. So Be a Helping Hand, the William F. Buchanan CDC, Jump, New Level CDC, and Mount Calvary CDC. I did it. Oh, but yes, call ourselves the North Nashville CDC and a community development consortium, and really just trying to make sure that we're connected with developers developers as they come in, so we can connect folks to communities, so we can have these hard conversations that can be transformative, right? So, because that's what we really want. And so, yeah, I feel like as we continue to connect as CDCs, as community engagement firms, as people who are really trying to get the word out, we can really form a multitude of coalitions. That's just one that we've been really organizing around, so I wanted to share that.
And for anybody who's online, if you'd like to post a question to our panel, I'll be taking those and looking at the iPad here. If anybody in the audience has a question.
I'll ask a question. I've heard a lot of, can you use the microphone?
I think I can.
I'll try to.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, I've heard a lot in the conversation about the role of developers and the city and nonprofits. And I'm curious about what your thoughts are for residents, like what tools are at hand for residents who aren't associated with any of these entities to promote representation in the community.
Okay. If you didn't hear that, the question, you heard it, okay.
So I love this question, first of all, because I find myself oftentimes encouraging residents to bring themselves into the conversation and having an authoritative stance. Your absence and your silence, I mean, you don't add to the equation. You're not even a variable, you just weren't there. One resident can make a lot of difference. A lot of residents change the tide, right? And so I get to speaking that firsthand with planning commission, right? I mean, I wish that people would not have their first interaction with development at planning commission. I wish people would have their first interaction with development in their backyard, right? I mean, I grew up and, you know, as a young person, I didn't appreciate it, and now I do. You know, you had the nosy neighbors, right? The ones who are always wondering why you were out so late or what you were doing over here and doing over here. Like, lady, just mind your business, right? But that lady was looking out for you, and that lady was a central kind of intelligence agency for the community. Well, we've started to lose that, right? There's less and less people that see something and then engage directly with it. And so as a developer, you know, I go and I'm speculating on property, and I have clients that come and we're in an area and we see people and they see us and we wave and they turn and walk away, right? And it's okay, and people see you and they're like, oh, you're gonna buy this property? And it's like, yeah, I'm thinking about it. What do you think should go here? Nothing. And then they leave, right? And we can have, those can be conversations. And in a short way to answer the question, every interaction that you have with somebody, it impacts them in some way or fashion. And so don't think that you're just one person. Don't think that they're not going to listen. And to the points that you were making earlier, that network that you may not feel comfortable or educated or whatever, but we have to, again, educate our citizens on their neighborhood associations, their local organizations. How can they reach out to, you know, the Civic Design Center and say, hey, we have a rubric and a playbook for developers who want to come into our communities. Let's make sure we give them that, right? Like, there's resources that are here in abundance that just a lot of people don't know about, and they don't know when to ask. And a lot of times people don't get engaged until it's right at their back door or front door, or right at the corner that they know by every day. And I don't mean this in a bad way, but sometimes it's too late. Like, it's never too late, but sometimes it's too late, right? You know, you could have been really facilitating a lot of good things with the days and nights that we let pass us by.
Yeah. So I would say that when I really started getting deep into, I need to get deep into civic spaces and conversations and discourse in Nashville. I went on to all of the commission's websites and I subscribed to their newsletters and I subscribed to their email list. So all of the civic organizations, all the government organizations, they have to post their public meetings and their agendas. So all of that is public information for everyone to see. They sometimes can be effective at hiding it, but the Consortium works really well. So I've had to search a few things. I'm like, man, where did they put that? And then you search it and you don't even have to like click through their little link tree. So that's cool. But also connect with Jump Dugar Communications does a great job with our newsletter. So, hey, Karen. So, we send out updates, connect with as many organizations that you can that do the work that you're interested in, sign up for their newsletters. And if they're not doing the work that you feel like they should be doing, complain. Call their offices and be like, hey, why aren't y'all having these conversations? Isn't this a part of your mission? What is going on? Raise a little, make a little uproar, get some good trouble. So, oh, but yeah, I would say get involved as much as you can. Before I took this position with Jump, I was on the board for 4 years. And so I got involved because I was like, I see this Jefferson Street art crawl. I love this area. I'm loving these artists that I'm allowing myself to work with. What does it mean to support their economic sustainability? And so that's why I became involved with Jump, and here I am. So yeah, I just say get involved, get on somebody's board, start getting some trouble.
Love it, thank you. I wanted to add one more thing to the topic around the mixed use income in spaces. One of the handicaps to offering the subsidized rate is it sometimes prohibits the artist or the person to make more money, because if they make more money, then they lose their house that they in their neighborhood that they really like. So there's a project in New York that had like a graduating income. So essentially, if you made more money that month, you could pay a little bit more money. That kind of supported the community more, but you weren't penalized when you didn't make more money that month. And then when the year end came and it's time for your tax return, you weren't worried that you're going to get kicked out because you're now making however many $1,000 more than your base level you're supposed to make. And so sometimes when it's income based, it keeps you there. And so there's got to be a way that we do something that says, hey, you're not going to be kicked out, but because you're now making more money, congratulations, but we want you to add back to the community, and maybe it becomes a scholarship fund for somebody who's having a really bad month, and it helps offset. So it's something to think about, because I've said it's important to have it in all communities, but some of those guidelines can keep their growth, and that's not what we want to do. We want them to succeed. We want them to make more money so that they can buy their own dirt. And so I want to really be thoughtful about how that, since we're going to be the leaders in our community, of how we really change the way housing is. How do we not keep people there in terms of?
No,
Does that make sense?
cool.
I wanted to make sure.
No, it's a problem. I will say this too, she made me think of something. What can like residents do? Nurture and support your leaders, right? Because they're doing it, and you always want somebody standing behind you, right? You want those people that encourage you, right? Everybody doesn't have the time or isn't going to commit it, and those leaders, they're a lot of times volunteers and they're committing their time. Some of the greatest things that happen is when their community supports them. That can be that one person. So you may not take on that whole thing by yourself, but just saying, hey, thank you for doing that. What did you hear? Okay, great. And then also have a conversation with them directly, because you're impacting them, and then they take that and go and be advocates for you. So I think that's really important also.
And your point about just showing up and, being an active voice in some of these projects, but I think also understanding what it is you're talking about. And so we're all not educated in design or development or arts. But the Civic Design Center offers a socially conscious design 101 course, which is kind of a primer on and touches on a lot of different aspects of that conversation topics. And it's a quick process, but I think that's one thing. If you're interested in this and feel like you maybe don't exactly completely know the dynamics of that, I think that's one area and way to get engaged and involved. We offer that throughout the year. And other nonprofits like Neighbor to Neighbor that specialize in neighborhood organization trainings and doing those types of things is a good way to start if you want to learn more about everything that we're talking about, that that you might not know completely. And especially and absolutely getting involved in your local nonprofit. That's do have one question from our Zoom group. So it's from Hunter G. This is the G Studio, and it's directed at you, Lauren. So let's dig deeper on creating economic empowerment systems. What do you think? Can you describe a little bit more about what that means? Does that mean that challenging our economic model that is established by this? Does that mean challenging models that have been established by federal level, state level, local level? If not, great. I want to hear more. If so, I am in with you. Let's
Yes, it does not mean breaking laws.
Let's be clear about that.
It does not mean challenging facts. It does not mean taking out a loan from, how they used to do in the pandemic. Anyway, those pandemic loans, they will find you. But what it does mean is creating systems of financial development, making sure it's starting very foundational within in educating your community about what does it mean to have and get economic empowerment from the point you are at now. And so I say it's it should be a process that can be valuable for any community member. And so I want to be able to educate and then empower and give them set up systems. There are so many different banking institutions here in Nashville, like private banks, that really work with the community member, like Truist, those types of banks really work with the community member to really create a plan for themselves. And so connecting folks to those institutions is very important when we're talking about creating programs and systems to guide people towards an economic empowered space. And so also allowing them to map, like, what are their goals? What are their dreams? What are their wishes? And then being able to help them enterprise those things so that they can be successful economically. And so that's really the work that JUMP is moving towards, is developing programmatic spaces that are a funnel for community members to engage in either low-income housing or financial development or workforce development. And so those are the kinds of economic empowerment engines that we're creating.
I have to add Studio Bank to that too.
And Studio Bank is their great partner, yes.
Well,
I'm trying to be more radical.
and it strikes me that you're current leader of UI for Institute Nashville. Maybe you should talk to Lauren about the program with developers in North Nashville Community Development Coalition. Yeah, absolutely. Because educating as many developers as possible will be part of the process. And none of ULI does that too. So we are nearing the end of our time. I'm just going to maybe give it back out to any of you with like a parting thought or something that gives you hope in the company here. I mean, we've been through a couple of rough years here in Nashville and across the country. So maybe a combo of that or something else.
So I'll say one thing, which I think is the conversation I had somewhat recently in the community engagement that, Nashville has been given all of these really accurate nicknames, right? Hit City, Supernova City, and I think, with all the economic prosperity, a lot of times people use the term, rising tide lifts all boats. And I think, you talked earlier about giving boost. I think we have to make sure we're building boats for everybody. Like we make the assumption things are good, everybody already has a boat, but a rising tide of people don't have boats is a very bad thing. And I think we need to understand that everybody has a boat. And that should be our first knee-jerk reaction to whenever something good is happening, make sure everybody has a boat. And I think, if we start there and we build a program to make sure everybody gets a boat, I think naturally those rising tides will be celebrated by everyone. And I think that's really the mindset we have to put our city in. Something that gives me hope is as Gary after mentioned, being the ULI chair and seeing a lot of other organizations really feel the need to step in and work together to figure out how to handle the things that are happening with our city, because the changes are happening so quickly. Time is a great instrument, but it always goes against you. And so how do we leverage that? And it just has to be removing ego, collecting our resources together, and then really being more creative. I think that's the thing. Innovation is the solution to every problem, right? And it always has been, and likely always will be. And we just have to become an innovative city. I would love for Nashville to have that model that when developers come and all kind of banks come, and there's like a Nashville way, right? And so, if you're giving a certain percentage of your income and the city has economics that thrive, as the city gets more, you give more. And I think when we start to get that equation right, we'll succeed. And I feel like there's a lot of leadership around that kind of thought. And so I think as long as we keep that going and push forward there, I think the city will do great things.
I echo all of that. You're so very eloquent. What gives me hope in this moment, in this time, is the fact that we're resilient and we are a resilient community as a whole. I identify with cultural resilience, so that gives me a lot of hope as we move forward. And so I also look at, the 37208 is a very special place to my heart because it holds an underdog feel. It's got that whole statistic around incarceration is a real thing, but at the same time, I feel like this area is so culturally resilient that we can really pull ourselves out of a space so that we can have a reputation of prosperity. And so that's where I'm working towards, and it gives me a lot of hope as I move forward.
I think for me, my understanding is we create vision out of change. And if we stay the same, we'll stay the same and it probably get worse. But if we're willing to be brave and change, and if our city and our officials are willing to be brave and change, we can grow into something really fantastic. We really can. We can be that model city that people say, oh yeah, Nashville, they're known for music and all this, and that's cool. But did you know that they have this creative voice that helps shape the way their neighborhoods are actually built and developed, which is gonna happen. I mean, we're gonna grow, and that's a good thing for the most part, as long as you said, everybody has a boat. The boat can be beautiful too. So I'll be trying to paint boats. But I've been to 21 years. That's a long time to see a city grow. It's a long time to watch a skyline change. I happen to live and work in a historic district that hasn't had that much change physically until the bomb. But up until now, it's kind of stayed the same, but our streets really need some help. Our sidewalks really need some help. Our infrastructure really needs some help. Our byways, our greenways. We're getting so many cool things, and Boathouse is going to be amazing. I can't wait for that to happen. But we have to be thoughtful of how all that interconnects with all the other locations. And so change is beautiful, and we can do it in a really great way together. Definitely have to get out of this whole silo mentality and overlap way more than we have. And we can really create dramatic change with a lot of beauty and make a lot of people happy too.
Thank you all so much. It's been a pleasure to start the year with you all and to serve as the foundation for our coming program in 2022. I'm inspired by all of you, and I really do look forward to, the work that we can all do, not just with us, but with all the other organizations and groups leaders and city and developers, designers that are really trying to do great work in Nashville, and we'll work on the others and try to get them on board too. Okay, so we will cut it off here and look forward to please joining us for the next in our series of programming, Urban Design Forum in February, March, and April that are focused on the other 3 pillars of our 12 guiding principles. So with that, thank you all. And thank you all for joining us virtually. We hope next month we can actually be in person. So, all right, good night, everybody.